Hello everyone, welcome to Shane's Shed. Today I'm going to be doing this right hand front CV joint. I'm going to be removing that. We're going to throw some new boots on it, pretty much about it. So this is going to be my guide. Hopefully it should be pretty straightforward, but I'll show you what's involved on the way through. Alright, so here's the big selection of tools I've used for this job. Obviously, a pair of the boots, that's what we're replacing for this main job, so definitely need those. Other consumables, some anti-seize as well. It's very handy, especially if you're in a part of the world where they salt the roads. Obviously, first thing you're going to need a jack and some car stands. They're quite important, especially if you don't have lift. Hammers, we've got a hard face and a soft face. Got long nose pliers, got some pry bars. I've got some wedges here that I'll use to open up the lower ball joint. You could use just a big flat blade screwdriver, that's fine. Side cutters, circlip pliers. Now the ones that open up a circlip, not the ones that close them up. I've just used my two-legged puller here, but if you've got a ball joint separator, you could use that instead for the tie rod ends. Flat blade screwdriver, 5mm Allen wrench, 21mm socket is for the wheel nuts. We've got a 12, 14 and a 17mm spanners, so you really want a selection of those and sockets. I've got a 10mm socket as well, or you could use a 10mm ring spanner, that's fine. Got some extensions for our socket set, a torque wrench and a 32mm socket for the main wheel nut, and that is about it. Rattle gun's optional, I just use that for the wheel nuts. So with that wheel off, we now see that totally damaged CV boot on the inner, so that's what we're going to be replacing. First step, we need to pull out the drive shaft nut. Now the Mitsubishi manual does specify not to put any vehicle weight on this hub with this nut removed, so just bear that in mind. Front wheel speed sensor, we'll just need to remove that from here and hang it up out of the way. Obviously we'll loosen off our brake hose bracket. The stabiliser link, we need to undo that. The lower ball joint, this nut here, this bolt, we'll need to pull that out. Tie rod, and once we've got all that out, we can pull the drive shaft out. So in order to get this drive shaft nut off, we're just going to remove this split pin, and then I'll just get the rattle gun straight onto that. This drive shaft nut, what size is it, Logan?
32.
That's right. So the wheel speed sensor, the 10mm socket, pull these sort of straight out as much as you can. These are magnetic, as you can see there's bits of metal and stuff already on them, so we'll give those a wipe up and a clean before we put it all back. So that bracket just has these little tags that just hang into there, and we can probably further remove it by undoing this bracket here. So the brake hose bracket here, it's just a 12mm nut. Let's undo this one here just to loosen off the ABS wheel speed sensor. So we'll get that one out of the way and we can sort of treat them separately. I can get that one out a bit more easily. That one as well. Alright, so stabiliser bar bracket, a 14mm here and a 5mm Allen key which will hold that in place, which may or may not be needed. For that stabiliser link, you may just have to jack up the other side because it's a sway bar. If you've got a bit of articulation on your suspension, on the one's down, which this one is, and the other one's up slightly, it'll just bind up, make it hard to get it undone. So that's my little tip there. This lower control arm bolt is a 17mm. our tie rod is also a 17mm. Now these should be on a taper, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of pressure downwards on this, and I'm going to give this end a hit with a hammer. Should just shock it and release it. All going well. This doesn't seem to want to budge with impact, so I'm just going to use my little two-sided puller. That should do the trick. Here's another little tip as well. Once you get this free, well, before you get this free, should I say, make sure you back that nut off so it's the nylock's disengaged. Otherwise, the whole ball joint just spins and it's hard to get off. So I had to re-engage the taper again just to get that off. So I'm just going to drive a wedge into here, just to open up that knuckle a bit, and hopefully I can release that lower control arm. Now you can see on that close up where that locking pin sort of goes in that little groove that's around that lower ball joint. The next step is just to get this drive shaft back. Sometimes this may be seized and it might be difficult, but in this case, just by hand. So I need to pull the whole strut out without trying to stretch that inside joint, because that will fall apart. That's that bit out. Now we're just going to go underneath. Now I hope you can see this next step okay. There's a bit of a limited room, so this bracket here that holds this bearing for the inner part of the CV, there's two bolts just up the top. They need to come out. So they are a 14mm, and you just need probably a bit of an extension on your ratchet as well. It helps. I'll show you this bracket a bit more when we get it out. There's one bolt and the second bolt. And that is literally what holds that drive shaft in place. There's no circlip on this right hand side. We can then just slide the whole unit out of the car. Normally I would change out this inner seal, but this one's not leaking, so I'm just going to leave it in place. Alright, so that's the that inner bracket. We need to remove those bolts off. You can see that torn boot. So we're going to change that. I'm also going to do the other as well. So first step, I'm just going to give stuff a little bit of a wipe just to clean things down a bit. Don't want to be getting too much dirt inside these CVs if we can avoid it. So I'm just going to cut this out of band with side cutters. And this particular end is just a spider that slides in and out of the joint. Just something worth noting as well, on the inner joint here, you see there's this snap ring here, so that needs to come out before this inner joint can be pulled apart. So there you go, that's out. That should just slide out now. I'll give this inner part of the joint a bit of a wipe out and a clean out, just get rid of some of the old grease. We'll charge it up with some new stuff when we put it all back together. And we'll give this a bit of a clean up as well. Just try and get rid of some of that excess grease. Alright, so next part here, just got this little circlip. So once we get that off, we can get the spider off and we can slide both the boots on and off So a pair of circlip pliers is required for this bit. Sometimes they can be a bit fiddly, but just keep your hand on them so they don't go flying, because they will. And that just comes off by hand, which is kind of remarkable, because some of these are quite stubborn. So I'll just get rid of that strap, that remaining part of the inner boot. And we'll slide that off. A bit of a clean again. That bit can go in the bin. Sometimes we can just pop these out, these retaining straps out with a screwdriver. Sometimes not. With those straps removed, we can just slide this boot back over the shaft. And it is a bit messy because of that TV grease. Lots of rags are required for this task, as you can see. Pretty much ready for reassembly, I think. Give some of these things a final clean up, and you can see the difference in the boots. So this one was the inner. Oh, sorry, this one's the outer, this one is the inner, so you can tell the difference with these bits. So these are the ones that, so this boot matches in with that shape there. Alright, first things first, I'm going to get that outer joint down, so we'll put this one together first. So we've got some new CV joint grease with these, so what I basically do is just plug that in. That's not too bad for this one. Alright, so the strapping varies between some of your kits. This one's just you can see just the little band there, so what I'm going to do is just going to pull it through tight this way, just to tighten it all up, fold it over, then fold this bit over. I'll see if I can get a bit closer view for you. So long those pliers are just going to come in handy for this. Make sure that strap is obviously on the boot properly all the way around. I'll go this way so you can see properly. And for this we can just, I basically just roll these up so they tighten. Well, it's not perfect, but it's enough just to hold it into place, you know. There we go, and we'll just fold it straight over. Put a bit of pressure down. Once it's folded, it's not really going to go anywhere. Although, tighten your vise up, otherwise it might go somewhere. So there's no sharp edges for us to catch on. Now you can see the little groove there, so there is a little groove inside the boot, so I want to get that. I've just ruined it now for the purpose of showing you what's going on. Just make sure that that's sitting in its groove properly. Sometimes just to hide the sharp edges, you can just fold the end over. Just hammer it down, be nice and flat, nothing to worry about there. Alright, so now I make sure I get all my parts to slide over before I put the spider on the end of the shaft. So you can bring it all the way down. Once that boot's on there now, we are good for the spider to go on. We'll only go on one way. So once that's on, our circlip can go back on. Now this is probably easier to put this back together on the bench while it's laying flat. But I'm going to fill this end up with some grease and basically just slide it all on. That'll grease will then squeeze through and it will do its job. Okay, as well, before you get that boot on, this strapping is not so bad, whereas you can sort of pull it apart and get it on after the fact anyway, but I always get the bands on at this point. It's just sort of one less thing to remember. We'll whack our rollers back on the spider. And the way you can just slide back into the joint. Now obviously remembering our circlip that goes in place also. And just make sure that sits flush. And I just normally squeeze that CV boot to get some grease flowing around it. Then we can slide this boot into place now. Like I said earlier, those grooves will line up. And get that sitting onto its little taper here. And there we have it, one CV shaft with some new boots ready to go back in the car. So the torque value for these, the drive shaft bearing bolt is 41 Newton meters. The manual says it's a plus or minus 4 Newton meters. So yeah, 40 is pretty much good enough. Alright, so we'll get this drive shaft back in the hub. Sometimes a bit tricky on your own with things like this. It is handy to have an extra pair of hands to pull the upright out. There, that's in place. I'll pop this bottom ball joint back in. And this lower ball joint bolt is 71 Newton meters. Again, from what I can see, it had a tolerance of plus or minus 10 Newton meters. Light tap through. The steering tie rod end, 25 Newton meters. I'll just give these a bit of a whack just so the nylock doesn't spin the pin on the taper. So stabiliser linkage at 39 Newton meters, and as you can see, I'm just going to jack up the other side so the suspension will droop and this will line up. Brake line bracket and wheel speed sensor. Generally the wheel speed sensor, I'll give that a bit of a wipe off as well before I stick it back in, because they do have a magnetic property to them, so they will attract all sorts of bits of metal. I'm sure these have a torque value, I can get them in a sec, but they're not really a critical component holding anything on. Well, not anything major, if you know what I mean. And if you do want torque value, they say they are 13 Newton meters. We'll drop the wheel speed sensor in and we'll throw that little one on. I just nip these down. So these don't take much. The official torque figure is 8.5 Newton meters. For the drive shaft nut, now this one is set to 144 Newton meters. Now if you recall, when I pulled it apart, we had this split pin. So we need to whack this on, tighten up to 144 Newton meters, and then tighten it. If we need to tighten it further to line up a cotter pin, then we need to do that, but it's not to exceed 200 Newton meters. So I'll see if I can get away without having somebody stand on the brakes, because if you recall earlier, also said that the manual advises not to put vehicle weight on this hub without this nut tightened up. So it's obviously part of the bearing preload. I might actually be able to get that. Where did I put that pin? I can get that pin in actually straight away. Didn't even need to do anything special there. Just bend that over. And we're done. So our final move here is obviously putting the wheel back on. The wheel nut torque as well, I believe, is 110 Newton meters from memory. I could be wrong here, I'll double check that before I do this video, and if it's wrong, I'll post it up below. Alright, so thank you very much for watching, people. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what's involved for this job. It's not that difficult. So it's probably taken me about 3 hours, I think, all up. Maybe 3.5 with filming as well. So if you're doing this on your own, you should be able to smash it out in 2 hours, I reckon, pretty easily. So if you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Subscribe, obviously, if you haven't already subscribed. My channel is all about just sort of do-it-yourself maintenance work on vehicles. Please consider hitting that super thanks button, and maybe shout me a beer or something for the effort of making the video for you. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you on another video. Cheers, guys. Drive shaft nut is a 32mm socket.
32, that's gigantic.
Some anti-seize is handy, especially if you're in a salty part of the world. Some anti-seize is handy, especially if you're in a part of the world where the roll. Especially if you're in the part of the world. Get it, yeah. Okay, so with that, spit it out. Please consider hitting that super. Please consider hitting that super.